What if your future wealth is hiding in a house in the Philippines? Let's find out. Welcome to the fifth episode of Financial Freedom Philippines and the third episode in our Finding a Hotspot series, where we teach you the skills and knowledge you need to find the next real estate hotspot, the next BGC, the next Boracay, and the next big thing. Our mission is to empower Filipinos to build wealth and a brighter future. We are driven by a deep love for the Philippines and a vision of seeing the country and its people flourish. My name is Kane, and joining me today are my amazing co hosts, Georgina and Justin.
Hello, everyone.
Okay.
Hello.
And together, we've spent years diving deep into the world of real estate, finance, and banking. Our goal to equip you with the insights, strategies, and inspiration you need to make smart, informed decisions on your investment journey. All right. But before we proceed with this episode, let's just do a quick recap. So, Justin?
Yes. So here's what you missed in our first two episodes of this series. Episode one, we discussed what is a hotspot, the core concepts of these hotspots, real estate market cycles, why timing is where the millions are made, why you might not want to buy in a hotspot, why core drivers are so important. And in episode two, we discussed two core drivers, which were infrastructure and health and education infrastructure. Sorry, we discussed transport infrastructure and health and education infrastructure, to be specific. Now, I highly recommend to anybody listening right now that you go back to at least watch episode one, because we talk about so many core principles, and it's a foundational piece that if you watch this episode without at least watching episode one, it might confuse you. But we also highly recommend watching this in sequence, because we made it so you can watch it in sequence.
So that's what you've missed on Glee. And in today's episode, we are going to deep dive into two new core drivers. These ones also go really well together. So today we're talking about planned job growth, and we're also talking about affordability. So let's get into it.
Okay. So, our third core driver, it's called planned job growth. So, okay, I have a question for you guys. So, I'm going to name some places, okay, and tell me what those places have in common. All right. I'm going to name four places: Austin, Texas, in USA, Silicon Valley in USA, Dubai in UAE, and IT Park in Cebu. What do you think these places have in common?
They're tech hotspots.
Tech hotspots.
Um,
Okay. Okay.
they all have a in them.
Close enough. Good answer. Good answer. Okay. But technically, what they have in common is that the property prices grew in these places significantly because of one common denominator, which is the planned job growth. So, what is planned job growth? This specifically refers to strategic collaboration between the government and large corporations, where the government plays a central role in directing the economic development. So technically, this involved the government designating specific areas for employment opportunities by creating incentives for businesses so that they can operate there, investing in infrastructure for connectivity, as we discussed last episode about transport infrastructure, and encouraging population movement toward these areas. So the goal here is to decentralize the commercial and the employment hubs so that there's a balance and the regional growth, because we don't want it to be concentrated on just one area. So by analyzing current and future population trends, the government strategically plan the placement of jobs to accommodate the needs of people over the long term, such as jobs, housing, transportation, etc. Okay, so which brings us to the next question or the next topic. Why does planned job growth increase real estate value? Anyone?
Well, number one, probably the biggest reason is because it attracts large corporations, right? Because what happens is the government incentivizes these big companies when they're planning the job growth, they will incentivize an area to make it easier for businesses to set up. And because it's easier for businesses to set up, BPOs, enterprises come in and they set up shop. Now, what does that do, right? So when large corporations come in, number one, they lease a significant portion of these office spaces. So you have almost guaranteed long-term tenants taking up these big offices in that area, and generally they sign like 5 to 10 year leases, right? So, and those leases are high return because they're expensive. Now, number two, it also boosts the credibility of that area as well because these large corporations are brands, you know, PruLife, Eccentric, Telstra. These are multinational companies that are
Mm.
well known, and just them being there, them having a office location, you seeing their big sign gives that location their reputation. It makes it more premier, right? And
Mhm.
then all that stimulates the local economy and drives demanding support for infrastructure, and it increases the value of the area when they come in. And
Yep.
it's a very much a positive ripple effect on everything.
Yep. And just to add on that, on the effects of large corporations coming in, there would be, of course, a dominant effect, which would be the rise in income, disposable income, to be more specific, on these multinational companies. So, of course, when these companies come in, there will be better jobs, and better jobs means more income for people. So, with this
Yes.
job growth, it often correlates with higher wages, of course, and giving people more purchasing power for them to invest in real estate properties. So, and at the same time, there's also a boost in affordability because as income rise, individuals can afford higher property prices, which increases market values as well.
I think that there's also something to be said for the perception of growth in these areas as well, right? Like Justin was saying, a lot of these companies are brands. And when people recognize these brands, they do tend to have more confidence that like the
Mm.
economy is growing, that it's more stable. Yeah, they're very promising signs, which also leads to obviously real estate investors scoping out the area and seeing everyone else is looking in these areas, all these businesses are trying to grow in these areas. Why? And these real estate investors are starting to have that FOMO, that fear of missing out. They are interested in securing a property in these high growth areas sooner rather than later, which is also another factor that drives these prices up. So yeah, I think that these areas with these planned job growths can have such a big impact on real estate if you really think about it. Yeah.
Then from a simplistic point of view, right? But more jobs. So these large corporations coming in equals more jobs, right? And what does more jobs mean? More people. What does more
Mm.
people mean? It means higher demand for housing. So it's
Mm.
all a ripple effect.
What are some examples of the incentives that these companies get? Is it just tax cuts?
I don't think the government incentivizes the businesses. I think they incentivize the developers to make it easier for them to build office spaces and residential housing in
Mm,
areas where they want planned job growth.
right. Well, I suppose we'd have to look that up.
Right. But yeah, there are tax breaks. There are tax breaks for the companies that want to come in the certain areas. Most specifically, it's called special economic zones. So when multinational companies go in that area, the taxable income of those companies are they have a different taxing system
Mm.
temporarily.
That's
Yeah.
interesting. So, yeah, that's a really good reason for people to consider investing in the Philippines, not just in residential, but also if
Mm.
they have a corporation, if they have a business. Yeah, Philippines obviously is very cheap labor. So, it might be an interesting avenue to consider.
Right. To be more specific, there are multiple tax incentives like income tax holidays, special corporate income tax at the rate of 5%. There's also domestic market enterprises income tax holiday for 47 years. It depends,
Mm,
right? So there are
yeah.
a ton of tax incentives and tax exemptions on these specific areas
Mm,
that the government are targeting or planning for job growth, which I think brings us to our next topic, that planned job growth is not natural,
Yeah, it's
right?
planned.
It's planned, exactly.
The
Yeah,
name.
then it's around the name itself.
Yes, this is an interesting one because, like Justin was saying, it's not always necessarily the government. Also, it is in the input of property developers here in the Philippines. So, everybody has to work together in order to plan this job growth. It prevents chaos. These things don't just happen overnight, they don't just pop up randomly. Extensive planning and preparation is required to ensure these developments are sustainable. Without planning, competing industries and overcrowding in prime areas could occur. It could stifle growth and it could stop change from occurring. So, it's a really reassuring thing to remember from an investment perspective that this planned job growth has got lots of different people backing it. There's lots of effort, there's lots of planning, premeditation, thinking that goes into it. So yeah, it is a very deliberate move. It's relatively safe as far as investments go.
And these things, they have to account for future growth. So they think
Yeah.
about, the population, how that's going to grow, how immigration's coming in. All those things they have to think about when they're thinking about this core driver, to make sure that, like you said, it's not chaos. Like if you just randomly pop up, let's say IT Park in Cebu, in the middle of nowhere with no infrastructure, well, it's going to be it's chaos. People won't be able to get in, businesses won't want to go because they can't get in, and things of that nature.
Yeah.
Right.
And this ties in really nicely with the core driver from last episode, which was transport infrastructure, right? So,
Mm.
job planning and property growth has to align with infrastructure. It is a ripple effect. It's not just buildings that we're building, it is roads, it's rail links, it's utilities like internet, for example, electricity. It's all a coordinated effort to really accommodate and support an increased population, but also boosted economic activity. So, for example, even just widening roads that already exist, or adding railway lines or railway stations, building car parks and other parking structures to ensure access and mobility. Job planning is very intrinsic with other core drivers like infrastructure.
Just to add on what you just said, Georgina, the reason why the government plans job growth is to diversify risk. And they do this by diversifying industries and locations. Instead of concentrating all industries in a single area, the planners ensure that hubs cater to various sectors, such as in tech, manufacturing, healthcare, etc. So this reduces the reliance on any one industry. So take for example, the government doesn't want to concentrate all sectors in BGC, because if BGC tank, the whole economy tanks, right?
Yeah.
So the government is doing this planned job growth so that it diversifies risk and it spreads out that risk by putting industries in different locations. So this approach not only protects regions from economic downturns in a specific sector, but it also ensures long-term stability and resilience in the local economy.
I just want to add to your point, Kane, because I think it's important to say that we're not only just talking about diversing risk in terms of industry, it's also in terms of location. So the government plans and diversify their risks by also spreading out the jobs by location, because like you said, they don't want to be reliant on just one place or one industry. So they both have to diversify the industry and the location to make sure if anything bad happens, that they have backups, and there are other places where we can rely on
Mm.
economic growth.
And also, this brings us to our next topic, of course. The government doesn't just work on their own. It's
Mm.
not just the government. This is a collaboration, more specifically with larger developments. So that's another thing to remember here, that planned job growth is actually rarely a solo effort. So it thrives on the collaboration between governments, developers, and businesses. So there are stages on how this works. So first, it starts with the government. So the government incentivizes businesses. So the government says we need to make more jobs. We need to create more jobs. So what the government does is that they offer tax breaks, they streamline the permits, and they make sure that infrastructure investments attract businesses and developers on these targeted areas. So take, for example, with the Philippine Economic Zone Authority accreditation, which provides the fiscal incentives like tax holidays and reduced corporate taxes for developments like IT Park in Cebu or in Eastwood in Pasig. So that's the first stage. And then the next stage to that would be investment coming in from private developers. So private developers such as Ayala Land in BGC or Mega World in Eastwood invest in creating high quality offices, residential areas, and supporting amenities in these targeted areas by the government. So the developers rather ensure that these areas are attractive to both businesses and workers by building modern infrastructure, green spaces, and mixed use facilities. And then lastly, the last stage would be input from businesses. Corporations, particularly in the BPO and tech industries, they provide feedback on the specific requirements for their operations. So the feedbacks comes in forms such as the office layouts, the connectivity, and the workforce access. And in connection to that, most likely, not all the time, they have what you call pre-commitments on or leases from these businesses uh, that they give to developers for financial security, and so that there's a guide on how to design these hubs. Let's give an example. So in IT Park Cebu, that's because BGC is like it's too much. Like it's always used. Let's look at another location. IT
Let's
Park
use
in
it some
Cebu.
variety.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the government designated IT Park in Cebu as a PEZA accredited special economic zone, making it highly attractive to BPO companies. So then developers like Cebu Holdings Incorporated, this is a subsidiary of Ayala Land, a real estate developer giant here in the Philippines. They worked closely with the government to create a business district with state of the art facilities and accessibility. And then after that, bigger BPO companies with the government incentives, new infrastructure, and develop commercial spaces by developers set up shop in this targeted area. And then the result of all of that was that IT Park in Cebu became one of the most sought after commercial hubs in the country, in the
Mm.
Philippines. Yeah.
I also want to just briefly talk about developers because some of our listeners might not be familiar. Because a property developer in the Philippines, they're very big and they're not limited to just residential projects.
Yeah.
Whereas in Australia, for example, they kind of are. They're split, commercial versus residential. So when we say that a developer has been consulted in with a government project, it gives a sense of esteem to the project because these developers have a reputation. Everybody is familiar with these companies. Everybody knows MegaWorld. These are
Yes.
very, very big developers and they have
Yep.
a reputation for building high end properties, high
Yep.
end malls, high end office buildings.
Yep.
Everybody knows this. So when people hear, oh, AL is building down the street, that is also it's a confidence boost for real estate investors and also people who are looking for jobs in these areas. They know AL is a reliable builder, that we know their office spaces are purpose built, for example. So people are more likely to invest because they recognize these developers as well.
Which brings us to the next topic, that this core driver can make a location extremely valuable. So, Georgina, while you're at it, why don't you tell us about this?
So this core driver makes a location extremely valuable. This is particularly because there's lots of money being invested by the government, by developers, by large corporations in these areas, and
Mm-hmm.
they don't want to lose their money. They need these areas to be built. They need them to be filled and rented. They need them to work. There's so many years involved with planning these areas. So governments really don't get it wrong. they work really hard to fight any issues that arise, that any challenges that come up, they work really hard to resolve them because they've already invested so much time and also so much money into the surrounding infrastructure and also other developments. So abandoning these projects, it's not an option. It is
For
not an
sure.
option.
Yeah.
Yeah. Everybody is committed to ensuring the success of these areas. So, investors can kind of invest early and have confidence. They're almost guaranteed the success that, the government is going to pull through, the infrastructure
Mhm.
is going to be built, and their investment is safe. And
Mhm.
if everybody is looking for a risk-free investment, when you know that there's planned job growth in the area, yeah, this is a really strong core driver for you.
I wouldn't go as far as say risk free, because there's no such thing as a risk free investment, right?
That
But
is true.
I agree with you in terms of if anything goes wrong in these planned developments, they will invest more money, they will invest in marketing to market the area, they will invest more money because they've already sunk a lot of money
Yeah,
in,
like
and they
at
will,
worst, they'll pivot, right? But they're not
yeah,
going to abandon the product. So you might
no,
end up with something
they won't
slightly
abandon it.
different. Yeah, but
Yeah,
you're going to get
absolutely.
something.
And I think that plays, you know, us saying that they won't abandon it and that it's valuable plays really into the fourth thing that people have to remember about this core driver, which is that it generally comes with multiple core drivers. And we've been saying this throughout the series that if you want to invest in something and you want to mitigate your risk and maximize the opportunity, a location should have multiple core drivers. And if you really look into planned job growth, it comes with those. So at the minimum, generally, of course, obviously, there are probably examples where this isn't the case, but generally, you're going to find 3 or 4 core drivers, and then
Mm.
being at least infrastructure. Obviously, planned job growth is also the core driver, right? And
Mhm.
then you're going to have probably urban renewal if it's an older place that they're turning into new. And then you're going to have private money. So these developers coming in, investing a whole lot of money into office spaces and residential. And then you're going to have multinational companies, which I'm giving away some of these core drivers. So hopefully you guys are grateful that
People are
I'm
taking
peeling
notes.
back. Yeah, people are taking notes, and we will talk about those core drivers later. But my main point is that it's extremely valuable, and it comes with multiple core drivers baked in.
Mm.
Yeah,
And
for
people
sure.
who have listened to last episode and the episode before as well might be starting to spot a pattern here that a lot of core drivers are interconnected. That if you
Yep,
have
they
one,
work
you're
Yeah.
together.
likely to have another.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
And also, I do want to add to what Justin was saying, and I want to bring something to take into consideration, more specifically remote work, because
Ooh.
remote work is something to take in consideration as well because of the impact of the trends.
It's a
So
bit of a controversial
it's
topic
controversial
at the moment.
for
Yeah.
sure, especially
Right.
with more companies, yep, adopting remote work policies. You were trying to say something, Justin?
From the last
Listen
episode,
to
we were
it.
discussing the impact of remote learning on universities and the value of universities in terms of real estate appreciation. This is
Right.
a very similar, right? So, in terms
It,
of
it
if
comes
people
into
are
play.
working, yeah, because if
Mm,
people are working remotely, well, they're not going to go into offices. And if
right.
they're not going into offices, those offices aren't going to be worth a whole lot. And if people are working from remote, also BPO companies are not going to rent these offices. And this
Yep.
whole planned job growth is very reliant on these companies renting out offices and making the
Yep.
people go in. So again, very
Right.
similar topic. So I think that remote work will not impact the value of planned job growth when it comes to real estate appreciation and growth,
Mm,
because number one, there's rules around this. So companies, I know, I'm not sure the specific rule, but it's like 70-30. So companies have to have at least 70% of people come into the office and only 30% can work from home. Now that
Surely,
is
surely that's not it. Surely it's 70% of the time everyone must be in the office, and 30% of the time, everyone can work from home. That would be like a 1 day a week work schedule.
Maybe something like that, right? But I guess my main point is that the government has set a rule set around this to stop the impact of remote work, right? Because they have already seen the impact. I mean, we went through the pandemic when no one was working in the office, and then retail went down, restaurants, closed, lifestyle places like massages, whatever, right? All decreased in
Suffered,
value,
yeah.
and it had a bad impact on the economy. So I say that because that means that the government at least is going to stop that remote work from impacting, the value of planned job growth and people coming into the office. So basically, in short, my answer is that I don't think remote work, even though it's so trendy and everyone wants to work from home,
Yeah.
I don't think that the government will allow it to affect these areas like IT Park and BGC and Eastwoods and things like that.
I think that it will scale down. I think
Scale.
that, yeah, at the moment, it's sort of the idea that every company must have an office. It COVID has proven that that is not necessarily the case. Only essential businesses need an office for whatever reason. So I think that it will turn into like only the biggest companies or the most essential companies will have an office. It's either going to be seen as like a status symbol, as like that you're a big company if you can afford or if you're wasting money on an office space, or it's going to be potentially controversial and people will spot these names of companies on the side of buildings and go, oh, they have an office. I don't want to work for them because I want to work remotely.
Right. And just to piggyback on what Justin is saying, I think this most specifically the industries that relate to this is the BPO industry, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, the BPO industry, because it operates before the pandemic, they used to operate in offices because they had a heavy reliance on physical infrastructure and collaborative team setups.
Hmm.
So that's how the BPO industry grew. Just to explain, I'll get to my point. So technically, BPO companies invest millions of pesos here for office spaces in the Philippines, and they sign long-term leases, right? That's
Hmm.
why there's heavy. I think this is where Justin is coming from, where he's saying that it doesn't have an impact because again they're investing millions already, so it's they would just throw money if they would allow everyone to just to work remotely, right?
Hmm.
So companies are also at the moment they're offering incentives to encourage employees to work on site. So take for example like transportation allowances, things like that. So as office setups often align better with security, technology, and the collaborative needs of the industry. And then also not just the BPO companies, but for the developers as well, there's incentives. I'm almost there to my point. I'm getting there. I'm just piggybacking on what Justin is coming, where Justin is coming from,
That's all right.
right?
There's lots to say. There's some
There's lots to
information.
say for sure.
Yeah.
So I think one of the reasons as well why Justin said this is because there's incentive for developers when it comes to this topic. So developers who own commercial spaces are incentivized to ensure that these hubs remain attractive. Okay. So they have amenities and the infrastructures that support the operation of BPO tenants. So the continued development and modernization of IT hubs reflect on the confidence in the sustained demand for office spaces. So technically, because the BPO industry, it's just really, it's really strong. So it's
It's
not going
a big
anywhere.
economic driver in
It,
the Philippines.
it
It's
it's
huge.
so strong
Yeah.
that it's projected to generate $40 billion in revenue this year, 2024, with forecasts suggesting that BPO could reach 300 million, sorry, 300 billion to 500 billion dollars, not pesos, dollars in revenue for the country by 2030. So, for context, no other industry in the Philippines rivals the BPO sector in revenue generation or employment, solidifying its role as an economic cornerstone. So, yes, the statistics say this, the numbers are saying this, but I don't want to be a devil's advocate here, right? Because, yeah, but just
Make a point. let me piggyback on your point, right? Like
Yeah,
how
I haven't
big
even
the
finished
BPO
that
company
one.
is, right?
Yeah, go
So
ahead.
think about it from this, right? So I think that more companies are gonna look to hire Filipinos, right? And we will talk about this in another episode. But those companies aren't going to want to set up offices, right? So if you're an Australian company and you're a small business or a medium-sized business and you're looking for skilled work, chances are you're not going to open up an office. You're just going to hire a Filipino and let them work from home, right? So I think that
Mm.
is going to be a growing trend. But the thing
Mm-hmm.
is that that doesn't matter because of the size of the BPO industry and how big it's
So
going to
big.
be even later, that because BPO companies really require people to come into the office, because if you think about the setup, it's like they need telephones, they need reliable internet, and if you allow everybody to work from home, unfortunately that means you have to buy them, but expensive phones and internet. And I'm sure a lot of people are going to hate me for saying that, a lot of BPO people that want to work from home. I'm just being realistic here, right? And
Yeah.
and generally these bigger companies like people coming into the office so they can track them, let's be honest, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And I guess my main point in saying that is because the BPO industry is so big and it's going to be even bigger, that even if you have more companies allowing people that are not BPO, by the way, allowing people to work from home, it's not going to affect the commercial spaces, because the BPO is going to dominate those commercial spaces and it's going to force people to work in the office for the reasons that I just stated. So that's why my strong opinion is that, at least for now, at least in the next like 30 years, that remote work will not really affect commercial offices here in the Philippines.
Okay, and that concludes our with
One
Justin
more
and
core
Estra.
driver.
Just kidding. But yeah, Justin has really strong. He really likes BPO, so like strong opinions about BPO. But I definitely
Yeah.
agree with everything that he said. I definitely agree with that.
To interrupt, so people don't cancel me, I love work from home, by the way. Like I'm a big proponent. Like, I mean, company Estra Finance, we all work from home, and in
Yeah, we
the
all work
future
from
we'll
home.
all be
Everybody.
working from home. I'm just talking about it from like a logical and realistic point of view, and from a property investor point of view. Like I said, I'm pro working from home. It's just probably 95% BPOs are going to still make people go into the offices. And that means that those offices are still going to be very, very valuable. And this core driver is super valuable.
Right, exactly. Yeah, but I just want to piggyback. I agree with everything Justin said. Like the numbers say that the BPOs they're dominating, they're strong, they're here to stay. They want you to go to the offices, right? That's why
For
they're
sure.
investing in the Philippines. Absolutely. But at the same time, as someone who has never worked in an office, someone who's never been an office guy, like
Mm.
I've never been a desk guy. I've always worked from home. There is statistics backing up this claim that it can be really something to take in consideration of. More specifically, the statistics say that in 2018 to 2022, the Philippines experienced a substantial growth of 78% as a remote work hub. And
Wasn't that because of COVID? That's like inflated because of
even in 2023, the country continued its upward trajectory of
Interesting.
60% after 2022. So
Hmm.
this is data collected over the first 10 months of that year.
Sorry,
First 10 months
what
of
was it that? An
2023,
increase, a
increase of
62% increase.
60%.
Okay, I see. But obviously that can be skewed, because if it was zero and then it increased to 60, that could be 60%, right? So that stat could be taken out of context, because if the Philippines was originally not really a remote place to work at, a 60% increase could be very small. Could be a very small number relative to the people that actually work in the Philippines. Does that
Yeah,
make sense?
makes sense. But I knew you were going to say that. So actually, by 2023, Philippines is already considered as the one of the world's top remote work hubs.
Oh, interesting.
So by number, Filipinos are really transitioning into. So it's something to take in consideration of with regards to real estate values, most especially for BPOs. Because I really I brought this up, like it was a really long like numbers and all that kind of thing. But yeah, statistics say that it's definitely a factor that our audience should definitely look out for. So I don't want
Mm,
to be a devil's advocate, but yeah, we want to show the positive and the negative um aspects, right? The negative sides. So both sides, right? Because we want to do our research. We want to look at the numbers. So
exactly.
yeah.
And this is
Yeah,
a good time to remind people, do your own research. Don't just take
there
our
we
word
go.
for it.
Yep. Yeah. That was fun.
Yeah.
Okay, which brings I think that's about it with regards to our plan job growth conversation. So it's an amazing core driver for
Yes.
sure. It's amazing, definitely amazing. It's something to look out for if you are an investor. Okay. All right. So let's move on to our next core driver, which is affordability. All right. Everyone loves that word. So
Yeah.
Tina, why don't you tell us about this?
Yeah, absolutely. So, first, let's be clear on the definition of affordability, right? It simply means that a property is priced lower relative to other locations around it. So, it doesn't necessarily mean cheap, it just means that it's competitive and attainable, which makes it attractive to a broader range of buyers and investors.
The reason why we say relative, because let's say you're buying in New York, right? And that's usually really expensive. Apartments go there for millions. And if you find an apartment in New York for, let's say it's $1 million, but then the other apartments around it are going for $2 million, well, relative to that location, that's cheap, right? So that is one way of thinking about it from an affordability perspective, is like relative to its location, is it cheap? But then you could also, from a broader perspective, think about it from like the whole US or the whole of Philippines. If everything is selling for Philippines, probably around, let's say, 200,000, right?
Mm,
And then you find a location that is 100,000. Well, that is also affordable. That's what we mean by affordability in those two contexts. So,
Yeah.
meaning from a broader point of view, like the whole country, or from a location point of view, where
mm.
relative to the medium house prices, it's cheap.
Yep, very good example, Justin. Why does affordability make real estate values go up? So, Georgina, why do you think so?
It's a supply and demand thing. You know,
Okay,
when there's more demand than supply in an area, property values in that area
okay,
increase, right? Like that's how the market works. When there's an affordable area, it makes it easier for people to buy into that area.
I think a good way to think about this actually is if we break it down in two angles, right? The two buyers, the investor and the home buyer.
good idea. Let's start with investors. So, since Justin, you brought it up, what about for the investor's perspective? How do they take advantage of affordable markets?
I think better question is like why do they like
Why do they like?
affordable markets? Yeah.
Yep.
So I would say number one is it allows them to diversify their risk.
Okay.
So if you imagine, if you were to buy, if you had a budget of $1 million, you can either buy one property for $1 million, or you can buy four properties for $250,000. Right? Me personally, I would rather buy four properties at $250,000 because it allows me to diversify my risk. And if
Mm,
one of those places don't rent out, I still have cash flow. And that's, obviously in this example, I'm buying cash flow positive properties, which I think
okay.
everyone should. But back to my example, if you bought just one and then there's no tenants for a long time, let's say the pandemic happens,
Okay.
there's no tenant. Well, that's one big risk that you're taking, right? So, affordability allows people to diversify their risk. Also, I'll make a second point. It's also lower entry. So,
Mm,
not everybody has $1 million portfolio budget. A lot of people have 100,000 or 80,000. So they kind of need to look at affordable markets if they want to start investing. So that is why these places see demand from investors, is because it's the barrier to entry is lower. So it
Yeah.
allows them to even get in, because they can't even get into a lot of the other markets that are more expensive because they don't have the budget.
I was thinking the same
Mm.
thing. I was thinking something similar in that a lot of property investors want to invest in property, but they're priced out of where they live. So they're looking towards the Philippines, where in comparison to their current rental markets, the Philippines is very affordable.
Yep. Just in summary, what Justin just said. Number one, diversifying risk, right? Because you don't want to invest in just one property. You don't want to invest, like, take for example, if that property doesn't work out, or
Mm.
if it tanks, you don't have other properties that might offset that loss. But because affordability allows you to have more properties to invest in, if one property goes down, you have other properties that will support that loss. I don't know if that makes sense. Does that make
No,
sense?
it's exactly right. Yep. I think that affordable homes are a really tempting investment for people who like to buy property, right? Because you get higher
Hmm.
yields than the rent, obviously due to
Generally,
the lower
yeah.
purchase price. What was that, sorry?
Sorry, I was going to say, yeah, generally you're correct. Yep.
So yeah, due to their purchase price. So I was going to say that, for example, if we were to buy in New York, for example, where we're spending $1 million, that apartment might only generate $3,000 in monthly rent. But if we were
Right.
to buy a much more affordable property at, say, $200,000, and that property could generate $1,500 in rent, that's obviously a much better return. So it
Yes.
just makes more sense financially to buy an affordable property. I also wanted to say as well that when you buy an affordable house, in comparison to a house that costs a lot more, it's more likely that you will have like a longer term tenant. You're less likely to lose money during something like an economic downturn. So, like, for example, when people are living in luxury properties, they often can't afford the rent, so they'll move out. But when you're renting an affordable house, rent is generally cheaper, even if the investor is getting the better return rental yield. The actual tenant itself can still afford to pay the rent every month, so it's a lot more
Mm.
of a resilient investment.
I'm going to make a devil's advocate point of view on that one, because if you think about it, the lower the rent, the lower the type of tenant that you bring in, because they're making less money. So
This is a
just
controversial
from
take.
behavior, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, sure.
You got to think about it, right? And maybe there's a middle ground. Like, it's like the middle affordable houses have more reliable tenants, and then the two extreme ends. So really expensive houses might have more people going in and out of them, and then really, really cheap houses might also have really people going in and out of them.
This is a very common problem for people who rent out their houses. Property managers will be able to relate to me when I say sometimes you get some less than quality tenants. And that is
Right.
just the name of the game. Unfortunately, it's
Yes,
like Justin
that's
said,
true.
you do need to find that middle ground. And it's also like we
Right.
discussed last episode, when you choose your investment property, you need to think about your social demographic and who's going to
Right.
rent it out.
I was about to bring that, so thank you for
Oh,
bringing
wow.
that up.
Great minds
So,
think alike.
okay, so just to add in to everything that you guys just said, another reason why affordability makes real estate values go up is because of financing flexibility. That's another reason, because affordable, why investors like affordable housing is because they're so easy to get financing for. Cheaper homes are easier to finance with lower down payments and monthly costs.
Look, we're talking about financing, so I think it's a good time to talk about Estra, because
Yeah.
getting a loan can be complicated and overwhelming, especially when it's usually a big investment. And it's probably the biggest investment you'll ever make, right? So, but don't worry, we're here to help. Our goal is to make the process of getting financing easier and we'll ensure you get the best fitting deal for your financial situation, which is super important, especially when you're an investor. And we'll guide you through step by step. Now, we're actually what you call a mortgage brokerage. So we sit in the middle between you as the investor and the bank, and we sort of act like your lawyer in a way, making sure that you understand what's going on and that you're making the right deal for your financial situation, which can be quite hard because the banking here is very complicated. And probably a good word is not very transparent, unfortunately. If you go to a bank, they will, try and sell you on their bank, where we act as an unbiased third party for you. So if you are looking for a home loan, I think I, I would implore you to reach out to us. We will have a link in the description for you to do so.
Thanks for that, Justin. Now, I do just have one more point. I hope you guys don't mind. I think it's a really good point. I just want to talk about the appreciation potential of these affordable properties. It might seem like common sense, but I'll just say it anyway. Affordable markets often experience faster appreciation as they, quote unquote, catch up to the more mature, more expensive markets in the surrounding areas. So, like, think about early stage BGC, which we always do. Prices skyrocketed as surrounding development progressed, and it will happen in other areas as well with affordable markets.
So I think a good example would be BGC, right? So if you bought BGC very early on and then 5 years later, your chances are your investment would have increased by a whole lot. Versus if you buy in BGC now and then 5 years later, it's probably the appreciation has probably slowed down because it's a more mature market. So you're more
Yeah.
likely. Now, obviously, this is very contextual and you have to analyze a location. But generally, if you buy very early in an early development place, and because it's early, it's going to be affordable, that it's going to appreciate a lot faster than if you bought it later on when it's more matured.
And also remember as well that appreciation changes based on the location. And we're talking not just towns, not just areas. We're talking about streets. We're talking about blocks. We're talking about, one house on one end of the street and one house on the other end of the street. Just a reminder that you should really get granular when you're looking at potential investment properties.
Let's do our research. Everything's contextual. All right, now let's move on to the next perspective, which is the buyer's perspective. So for everyday buyers, affordability, of course, opens doors to home ownership for a variety of reasons. Who wants to go first?
The reason why buyers like affordable houses is because you get more bang for your buck. What we're really talking about is more space. You get more space. You, instead of a 1 bedroom, you're getting probably a house and lot with 3 or 4 bedrooms, depending on where you're buying, right? So that is a reason why buyers would go for more affordable places, because they can buy more space.
I also think that unfortunately, a lot of everyday buyers are forced to look for these more affordable markets. They're priced out, right? Like there's like inner cities just too expensive. They have to be smarter with their money. They have to look for a more affordable home because everything else just simply becomes too expensive. Those desirable areas have skyrocketed in price and they have no choice.
Yep. And I want to piggyback on that because another factor why affordability comes to play here is because infrastructure accessibility allows buyers to live outside the city.
Mm.
Taking in consideration because it's too expensive already to live in the city. So improvements in transportation makes it easier to live outside expensive urban centers without sacrificing convenience. That's why
So
buyers.
yeah, sorry, I was just going to say, so like even though you're priced out of these desirable areas, that might not even necessarily be a bad thing. If it's just as convenient to live outside the city, you get more space, you get more bang for your buck, and you've got a train, that you can just take to work.
Yeah.
It might even be a beneficial thing to be priced out.
Yep, they can take advantage of that for sure. And
Definitely.
another thing that I want to bring up as well is that there is much more, not necessarily much more, but there's lower financial risk when
Yeah.
it comes to buying affordable ownership, home ownership, because affordable home loans means smaller mortgages, right? Which means
Mhm.
smaller, lower costs, reducing your debt burden and increasing your financial stability. That's
Yeah.
also one of the reasons why.
So
Yeah,
very similar to an investor's perspective, it's a lower down payment, it's a lower monthly repayment.
there we go.
But
Yeah,
yeah,
sure.
making home ownership a reality for people who are on
Yep,
the lower income who might not be able to afford it. And of course, again, if you're wanting a home loan, visit estrafinance.com.ph.
exactly.
Again, we have given you two perspectives of why affordability is a motivator for investors and for buyers. So all these reasons, all these motivators mean that affordable places will be bought by these two buyers. And if they're bought, that means there's an increased demand. And, real estate is very much reliant on supply and demand.
Absolutely. All right. Now let's move on to our next topic, which are the things to remember. So the first thing that we have to remember is affordable with nothing else going for it. You gotta think twice because it is
Yeah,
risky,
very
right?
risky.
Justin. Yeah, I think
Yeah,
I think you might want to say something about this.
I think that's the riskiest thing about buying affordable housing is just because it's cheap doesn't mean it's a good deal.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
an example is if you buy a farm and it is worth, let's say, $20,000. Great deal, right?
Yeah,
Well,
cheap
but if
farm.
if there's a cheap farm, yeah, but if there's nothing around it, it will never grow. Then really, you've just parked your 20,000 into a place that will never go anywhere, right? Or
Right.
maybe because a lot of people I see this like, okay, I'll buy a farm lot because it will eventually increase in value. Well, that eventually might take 20 years. And do you have 20 years to just park that 20,000? Wouldn't you rather spend that 20,000 in a place that will actually do something? So that is
Mm,
something that people really have to think about is, am I just buying this place because it's cheap, or am I buying this place because it could turn into something? And you have to really take that into consideration, because again, if you buy something just because it's cheap and you're like, great deal because it's cheap, well, you might as well just put your money into the bank, to be honest with you, because both instances your money isn't going to grow.
Yeah, you really
yeah.
need to look for those other core drivers. One's just not enough. It's not enough justification.
As much as possible, again, we reiterate 3 to 4 core drivers coming into play.
Hmm.
Very, very important to mitigate your risk. Now, let's move on to the second thing that we have to remember. Is it affordable because you're getting in early? All right. So, ideally, you're buying things that are affordable because you're getting in early. So, areas like BGC had its early stages. And in its early stages, there were properties were affordable because development hadn't fully taken off yet. So essentially, areas that are affordable but have multiple core drivers already there or being implemented, like infrastructure, lifestyle, land jobs, is the ideal situation for more investors, technically.
I just want to give an example, right? Because the
Mhm.
two are very closely related. So my point was, you don't want to buy property just because it's cheap. Where Kane is saying you want to buy property because it's cheap, affordable, and it potentially can turn into something. So my example was that you bought a property and it's a farm, it's a bit of nowhere, and because it's in the middle of nowhere, it's $20,000. Where in the case of BGC, right, in very early stages, it was very cheap. It's probably like 3 million instead of 15 million. But because you're buying in an area that will grow, that have multiple core drivers to it, just not yet built, it will turn into what BGC is now. So that is the clear distinction, is that one place has nothing going for it. The other place has potentially a lot of things going for it. It just doesn't have it yet. And that's why it's cheap.
Well said.
Yep, exactly. Took the words right out of my mouth. So let's just do a recap. We talked about Planned job growth. Planned job hubs create economic activity by attracting businesses, improving infrastructure, and fostering long term demand for property. And then at the same time, we talked about affordability, which amplifies this growth by making these areas accessible to a wide range of buyers and investors. This drives competition and it increases property values. All right, now that we've talked about some of the core drivers, it's time to dive into more core drivers in the next episodes. More specifically, private money and urban renewal.
If this stuff seems interesting to you, be sure to join our real estate community group. You'll gain access to exclusive resources that can help you make better strategic decisions. Plus, you'll be surrounded by people who are also looking to build wealth and strive for financial freedom. If you'd like to join this group, there'll be a link in the description below.
And if you're excited and you're ready to start your real estate investment journey here in the Philippines, the best first step to take is getting your free borrowing power consultation with us here at Estra Finance. You'll be able to find out how much a local bank will be willing to lend you. And you might be surprised to know that you will not be able to find out this information without us because local Filipino banks don't actually offer this information. Or if they do, it is just a very, very ballpark figure. So if you want some confidence in knowing you can afford to buy a property, get in contact with us here at estrafinance.com.ph. There'll be a link in the description below. And if you need some assistance finding real estate agents, we can get you in contact with some of the biggest developers here in the Philippines. Just let us know your needs and we'll be more than happy to help you.
All right. So don't forget to subscribe to our channel, join our real estate community group, and sign up for our free borrowing power consultation. That is all we have for you. Thank you so much for listening to our podcast. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.